I want to talk to you about what you've done today, okay? Can you just take me through when you woke up this morning to when you got stopped by the police out there?
What was the first thing said? I have the right to remain silent.
Okay.
As the evidence mounts against him, will the cops' cunning tactics and cagey behavior be enough to escape the clutches of justice?
I'm being silent.
Well, I can see that. We can do this all night. I mean, it doesn't bother me.
With a chilling secret lurking beneath the surface, will the truth finally be revealed?
You're going to continue to be a suspect until I find out otherwise.
Okay.
Bringing closure to the victims and their families. Join us as we delve into the journey of a dirty cop. A shocking secret lies beneath the facade of a 50-year-old cop, Grant Hardin. As suspicions of murder cloud his reputation, it's discovered that his actions and behavior far surpass the original accusations. During his interrogation, he employs every trick in the book to elude his fate.
You're a police officer in Gateway? It's an easy yes or no.
I'm being silent.
On February the 23rd, an abrupt, chilling noise interrupted a phone call between James Appleton and his brother-in-law. An anonymous white Chevrolet Malibu, later identified to belong to Grant, is seen speeding away from the crime scene where James lies dead, a gunshot wound marking his forehead. In the quaint Arkansas town of Gateway, home to only 400 residents, Grant's arrest is swift.
I don't understand why I'm a suspect, no.
The once respected police officer is cornered at a roadblock after a family dinner, swiftly ushered into the most grueling interrogation the Arkansas police have ever faced. As the interrogation kicks off, Detective Chamberlain attempts to connect with Grant over their shared profession.
I know we have James Chamberlain.
However, this strategy backfires, with Grant choosing to barricade himself behind his rights instead of opening up.
I'm going to exercise my right to be silent.
Okay.
Unaware of the specific allegations against him and possibly feeling the unfamiliar vulnerability of being a suspect, Grant claims to feel unwell.
I don't know what's going on. I am kind of sickly.
The detectives decide to step outside, affording him time to stew over his mess. Upon their return to the interrogation room, the detectives try a new tactic. However, Grant seems to have his own game plan. As a twisted tale continues to unfold, will the detectives' new approach manage to crack open Grant's shell? In a bid to secure Grant's cooperation, the detective implores him to recount his day, assuring him that if he is innocent, he has nothing to fear. Yet, Grant, a former officer, knows the drill all too well, his silence persisting.
So you don't want to explain what you've done today? Did you? Is there a reason behind that?
You read me my rights.
The detectives grow impatient, struggling to understand his silence when simply sharing his activities could potentially clear his name. Despite his silence being within his rights, it fuels the frustration in the room, leading the detective to retreat for a break.
I was gonna go.
Oh, no, you're not going to
tell
go.
you that.
Under normal circumstances, a resolution could be in sight by this point, either charging the suspect or releasing them due to insufficient evidence. However, with Grant, the rules don't seem to apply. The police scramble together more evidence, trying to stitch together a narrative from witness accounts to indicate Grant at the scene of the crime. Grant's continued silence, although within his rights, only stokes the detective's suspicion. The dubious alibi from Grant's wife, suggesting that he was merely spreading grass seed at the time of the crime, further fuels the suspicion. All indicators now converge on Grant, prompting Detective Chamberlain to initiate a third round of questioning. Detective Chamberlain confronts Grant, offering a brief insight into his timeline extracted from his wife's account.
Detective Cordero is talking to your wife right now. I talked to her a little bit, so I've kind of got a timeline of where you were and where you weren't today.
The detective emphatically stresses the importance of understanding Grant's version of events, whether the crime was intentional, accidental, or malicious.
If you've had a problem with this guy for a while, and this was an accident, you maliciously chased him down, or what happened?
He paints a picture of a book with 3 chapters: the start of Grant's day, the events leading up to the incident, and finally, Grant's account of the incident itself. He promises Grant one more chance to share his side.
I'll let you think about it. I'll give you one more chance here in a few minutes, and I'm not going to talk to you anymore. I'm telling you that.
Well, what happened?
I know, you know. We have witnesses that put you there. They physically ID'd you. The 2 cars that drove by. Look, man, I just want to know why it happened.
At the moment of the crime, when both cars were stationed side by side, the man in the white Chevrolet, later identified as Grant, gave a casual wave to the passerby just before the fatal gunshot rang out. The passerby, recognized as Andrew Tillman, a fellow resident of the small town who had known Grant since childhood, unequivocally identified Grant as the driver at the scene of the crime.
Who was it?
His name is Grant Harden. I just know that he worked for Gateway as a policeman.
He clings to the slim hope that the detectives may fail to assemble the necessary evidence to convict him. The detectives, driven into a corner, resort to desperate measures in a bid to crack Grant's silence. They grant him a visit with his wife and daughter, hoping this emotional encounter might compel him to break his silence. Regrettably, even a visit with his family fails to crack Grant's silence. As a last-ditch effort, Detective Cordero steps in alone, adopting a gentle, empathetic approach in an attempt to build rapport with Grant.
Awful hard.
Yeah, I don't know if you'll be any more comfortable out there than what you are now.
Often, male suspects might subconsciously connect better with female detectives, believing them to be less intimidating and more understanding. This approach is practically the last card the detectives have to play.
Can you help me understand how we got to this point?
I don't know.
I don't know.
The nostalgic conversation about their past experiences in law enforcement might help establish a subconscious bond, nudging Grant towards opening up. Grant continues to hold his silence, stating his reluctance to go to bed, to which Cordero agrees. Her emphasis on their mutual uncertainty seeks to make a connection, trying to make him feel less alone. She continues to urge him to talk to her, ensuring him that even if the incident was accidental, it would be better to speak up. Detective Cordero crafts a casual, comfortable atmosphere, using inclusivity in her language, such as we, trying to position Grant as part of the solution rather than the problem. Her body language is open and inviting, aiming to foster trust and relaxation within Grant.
Do you want to talk to me?
Can I get a lawyer?
Yeah.
I don't feel like I need to.
Cordero's attempts to appeal to Grant's sense of responsibility towards his family and assure him of her willingness to help fall on deaf ears. Grant sees his only way out as legal representation, firmly believing that something is amiss and that he needs a lawyer present during any further discussions.
I want to get a lawyer.
Okay.
After a lengthy and seemingly futile interrogation, Grant finally requests a lawyer, bringing the questioning to a halt. As the case progresses and the court hearings approach, Grant and his legal counsel come to the realization that his chances of being released without consequences are slim. Grant pleads guilty to first-degree murder on October 16, 2017. However, he remains tight-lipped about his motive, denying closure to the grieving family of James Appleton. During the process, a shocking revelation emerges that casts Grant in an even more sinister light. As his DNA is collected, it matches a previous crime committed nearly 2 decades earlier. In November 1997, a teacher at Frank Tillery Elementary School was assaulted by an unidentified assailant, leaving behind only DNA evidence on her clothing. The case had remained unsolved for 20 years, but now Grant's DNA proves to be a perfect match. Due to a John Doe warrant obtained by Rogers Police in 2003, allowing for the arrest of an unknown suspect beyond the statute of limitations, Grant is now charged for the assault in addition to the murder of James Appleton. At last, these crimes resulted in a sentencing of 35 years in prison for Grant Harden. With little chance of release, he's destined to spend the remainder of his life behind bars. In the depths of his prison cell, Grant Harden's chilling secrets continue to haunt him. But what if new evidence emerges, unraveling the truth and shaking the foundation of his conviction? Will justice prevail, or will the story take an unforeseen twist? Share your thoughts in the comments.
Fremont Police, do you have an emergency?
Hi, I'll be over there in about 10 minutes to give you information about the woman that was murdered over there in Clyde.
Misguided police investigation into the murder of a young single mother in Ohio.
Do you know that name by chance, Heather Bogle?
I don't even know who she is.
The 28-year-old's body was found in the trunk of her own car in the parking lot.
They found a beautiful young woman who had been savagely beaten and murdered.
Did you know her at all?
Very, very little. Very little.
I want you to know that you took away a mother and a friend and a loved one that no one can ever get back.
She was last seen leaving the parking lot of the Whirlpool Corporation.
Ever wondered what goes through a cop's mind when they do something they know is wrong? Well, if you want to know, you don't need to look anywhere else. It's right here. The victim's name was Heather Bogle, and she lived in the small town of Clyde, Ohio. Now, Heather's life was not easy, but she was a fighter. She worked the graveyard shift at a Whirlpool factory to support her daughter, but she had a history of depression. But Heather was not alone. She had a girlfriend, Carmilla Badillo, who worked with her at the factory. Now, this young single mother vanished without a trace one day after her night shift at the Sandusky County, Ohio Whirlpool plant. Heather was just 28 years old when she disappeared, leaving behind a young child who was waiting for her to come back home. As days turned to weeks and weeks into months, Heather's family and friends began to worry, and they reached out to the authorities for help. The investigation into Heather's disappearance was a long and grueling one, but it finally ended when her body was found brutally murdered and left in the trunk of her car just a mile away from the Whirlpool plant where she worked. But the investigation into Heather's murder was far from over. The lead detective on the case, Sean O'Donnell, was charged with tampering with evidence as he pursued 3 innocents while the real killer walked free. O'Connell's main suspect was a woman who lived near where Heather's body was found. Despite the admissible evidence that pointed to her innocence, O'Connell ignored it and continued to pursue her as a suspect. Sandusky County Sheriff Chris Hilton was quick to recognize O'Connell's mistake and called him out on it. Now, it wasn't long before O'Connell found himself behind bars.
Right, the court, for the reasons indicated, I am going to sentence you to 24 months.
And Hilton took over the investigation. Hilton knew that Heather's murder was a solvable case, and he was determined to do it right. Hilton stated that they would open up the investigation to the point where every lead, person, and everybody was a suspect until they could eliminate them. Hilton further added that it was what they did. As the investigation into Heather's murder progressed, Hilton and their team ultimately discovered a genuine suspect. The killer was someone who had been previously overlooked by O'Connell. It's hard to imagine the horror that law enforcement officials must have felt when they made the discovery in Heather Bogle's car. A young woman so full of life and potential, beaten and murdered in the most savage way imaginable. It's a tragedy that's hard to comprehend, and one that's left many people in Sandusky County reeling with grief and shock. As Sheriff Chris Hilton noted, law enforcement officials often try not to see things for what they truly are. They have to maintain a certain level of detachment and objectivity in order to do their jobs effectively. But in Heather's case, it was impossible to remain detached. The brutality of the murder was intense, and the evidence of the struggle she put up before she died was heartbreaking. Prosecutor Tim Braun described Heather's wounds in detail, painting a picture of a young woman who fought with everything she had before ultimately succumbing to her attacker. Defensive wounds on her hands indicated that she tried to protect herself, and had likely put up a fierce struggle before being beaten into submission. The fact that she was then handcuffed only adds to the horror of the situation. It's hard to imagine the fear and desperation that Heather must have felt in her final moments. The cause of Heather's death was 2 shots to the back, which penetrated vital organs in her chest. It's a gruesome and chilling detail, one that underscores the sheer brutality of her murder. The sheriff and the prosecutor both expressed their shock at the discovery of Heather's body. It's not hard to understand why. Prosecutor Tim Braun had said that her body appeared to have been carefully cleaned after her death, with her hair and fingernails cut. It was a gruesome sight,
like a pocket knife, and just going like this with it.
And the community was devastated. They couldn't imagine how anyone could have done this to a single mother who was just trying to make a better life for herself and her daughter. Heather had been working hard at the Whirlpool factory, hoping for a brighter future. But life had dealt her a harsh blow, and she had just failed her nursing board exams. It was a significant setback for her, and she was already going through a difficult breakup with her girlfriend Carmilla Badillo. Their same-sex relationship had added to her troubles, and she was feeling lost and alone. The lead detective on the case, Sean O'Connell, investigated everyone who was remotely connected to Heather. Carmilla Badillo was among the first to be scrutinized, but she was ruled out as a suspect. Kiona Bohr, who lived in the same apartment complex where Heather's body was found, raised O'Connell's suspicions.
Do you know that name by chance, Heather Bogle?
I don't even know who she is.
She had been seen wearing a Mickey Mouse shirt that Heather's body had been found in. O'Connell had also investigated Omar Satchel, who knew Heather and had a record of theft. O'Connell believed that Satchel had stolen a small caliber firearm which was used in the murder. However, neither the gun nor the bullets were found. Now, after going through all these wrong steps, they only started seeing improvements when they started tracking Heather's steps. As the authorities followed Heather Bogle's GPS data trail, they found the trailer where Heather was brutally murdered and the real culprit behind it. The authorities soon learned that the home belonged to Daniel Myers, one of Heather's co-workers. It was a shock to everyone when they discovered that he had worked with her on the same night as her disappearance and had left around the same time in the morning. The investigators questioned Myers, and he was cooperative, but he seemed distant when questioned about his knowledge of Heather.
Did you know her at all?
Very little.
Myers stated that he had very limited conversations with Heather, which had raised some red flags. What was even more alarming was when Myers asked why they were still investigating the case and suggested that it was over and done with, as it had been 2 years since her disappearance. It seemed like he was trying to distance himself from the investigation and the case. But the investigators persisted, and they requested a DNA sample from Myers. To their surprise, Myers declined, stating that he did not know Heather very well.
We've been collecting DNA buccal swabs. If that's all the same to you, we would ask you just to submit it's basically a Q-tip. Would you be all right with that?
No, I'm gonna pass on that because I don't feel like I need to.
What?
I don't really know the girl or anything like that.
It was at this moment that everything changed. The investigators obtained a warrant for his DNA, and the results came back 5 days later, indicating that the DNA found under Heather's cuticles belonged to Myers. It was a devastating blow for the family and the community.
We got a search warrant for your DNA.
Okay.
So what we wanted you to do is to be a little more forthcoming to help us narrow this thing down. Because you know what? We're narrowing it down.
Sheriff Chris Hilton, who had been leading the investigation, was overjoyed and felt like they'd finally solved the case. But for the family and friends of Heather Bogle, it was a bitter pill to swallow. A young mother had lost her life, and the person responsible for it was someone she had worked with and had seen every day. Also, when they searched his home, they found something that sent chills through everyone around the area. The floorboards in his house had been replaced less than a week after Heather's death. They believed that's where she was shot, and the boards were replaced to remove any evidence, such as blood or bullet holes. But that's not all. Authorities also discovered that Daniel Myers had contributed $125 to a GoFundMe account that was set up for Heather Bogle after her death. He even wrote a warm condolence note as if he was genuinely concerned about her well-being. As if that wasn't enough, Daniel Myers left proof that he was at Heather Bogle's funeral. He signed the registry book as if he was paying his respects to someone he didn't even know. The audacity of it all is sickening. And there's one more thing that authorities found, and it's the most heartbreaking of all. They discovered that Daniel Myers had a broken tooth fixed 3 months after Heather Bogle's murder. They believe that she fought back during the struggle for her life, and in the process, she injured her killer. Just imagine the pain and fear that Heather must have felt in her final moments. It's a thought that's hard to digest. To think that someone could be so cruel and take away a young woman's life in such a violent manner is beyond imagination. Now, when the cops looked into Myers' history, they found many more brutal things. Yes, there was another victim to Myers. When the authorities looked into the past of Daniel Myers, they discovered that Leanne had died 6 years before Heather Bogle. The similarities between the two cases were striking. Leanne was found with a single gunshot wound to the chest and a .22 caliber rifle lying beside her. At first, the authorities ruled her death a suicide, but her sister never believed it. It was convinced that Myers had killed Leanne. Anyway, justice has been delivered. Myers was sentenced to life in prison without parole, or should I say, Myers will never see the light of day as a free man. What do you guys say?